And so I want to work on this image, and I'm starting with this image because this is a perfect example of where HDR or being able to utilize HDR effectively comes in. So this is a scene in a mill. This is the Duck Mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and it's currently abandoned but being renovated for something or other. Um, so if you took this is with a 5D Mark II Canon camera and a 17 millimeter tilt shift lens. It's a pretty capable camera, but you can see right off the bat this was taken midday. The time was, just 12 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time. And on a single exposure, what you have here is a complete loss of information because the dynamic range of the scene is too great. Now, the dynamic range of the scene typically constitutes or includes the darkest parts of the image through the midtones and then onto the brightest parts of the image. Typically, the darkest parts are our shadows and the brightest parts are our highlights. Now, you can see with a single exposure, you have a total loss of information because the camera would have exposed to try to get the best exposure for the overall scene based on the metering that you did. So if it was like an evaluative metering, it would probably try to get the best possible exposure. If it was a spot metering, the camera would meter based on whatever the your focus point was. So if I had my focus point out here, the shot would look something like this. Exact same shot except metering for the outside. So you can see now this is the kind of opposite end of the curve. We've got good detail in our highlights here. The brighter parts of the image was actually kind of a gray, rainy day, but it was very bright. If I wanted to get that detail here, I do it at the sacrifice of the rest of the scene. We have no information. So what HDR does, when it's done effectively, is it will take all of this information that you take across multiple exposures, which we kind of, affectionately refer to as brackets, and combine them together using a process called tone mapping, which goes pixel by pixel across every image and kind of makes the best possible exposure. And that's a very much of a Cliff's Notes abbreviated definition of it. Now, you can see here that brackets are basically this. When you are shooting brackets, it's just multiple exposures of the same exact scene. The only interval is your shutter speed. So when you're exposing for HDR, and this is just a best practice, it's not set in stone, but you probably want to adhere to this. You don't want to fiddle with your ISO or your aperture. You choose those in advance. So I always, or I shouldn't say always, but I most of the time shoot at an ISO 100 or ISO 50 on my camera. And in advance, I'll look at the scene. So if we go to this kind of mid-range exposure, I'll look at the scene and I'll say, okay, well, it's an ultra wide angle lens. I don't really need to crank this down to, f18 or f22. F11 will give me enough of the, a nice deep depth of field so that everything from the foreground through the background's in focus. Also, that door is not more than maybe 20 feet away, 25 feet away, so I don't really need a very small aperture. And in fact, if it was even darker, I probably would have opened my aperture up even more because the correlation of aperture and shutter speed is direct. The smaller your aperture, meaning the smaller the diameter of the hole that is created when your lens's blades close, correlates to how long it'll take for the image to expose. So by keeping that diameter larger, meaning we're opening up our aperture, it takes less time because more light is coming through. But that's general kind of photography 101 stuff, that beautiful trinity of ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. So here, let's take a look and let's look at the different brackets here. So we start out here, and I use a device called a Promote Control. I've brought it up on many, many webinars in the past because it allows me to get more. It exceeds the limitation that Canon puts on the 5D Mark II and pretty much all of their cameras, where you can only take 3 auto exposure brackets. with this device, I can take as many as I want. So I typically take 9. And in this case here, I actually ended up taking a 10th one. So you can see here, as we scroll through, the camera is starting to get more information. It's almost like it's painting in light as we're incrementing shutter speed. So now the shutter is getting longer. So this is 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 8 seconds. And this is the last one. I took an even faster exposure just to Peter. I'll link you to the device at the end of the webinar. Every time I mention that, every time I mention the remote control, they're always, what was that device? I'll show it to you. I'll show it to you at the end. It's not the cheapest device, David and Peter. It's about $315, $320 after all said and done. But if you're serious about it, it's well worth it. Because here's the thing, everyone, and this is a very, very important point that I want to stress. There is no magic number to HDR bracketing. There are 3, 5, 7, 9, 100. No magic number. The magic formula is making sure that whatever brackets, whatever images here you feed to your tone mapping process, that they contain the information that you need. If you were to just send in, say like starting here, let's say, and this is a very realistic possibility. Let's say this is your fastest bracket, meaning this is the bracket that you're using to expose for the brightest parts of your image. This is not a good bracket to start with because you have clipped highlights, or blown highlights rather. So you can see when we go back here, much better. Now we've got good detail out here. Even though it's gray, at least it's not blown out. So let's go ahead and let's actually start tone mapping. Now, I use a variety of tone mapping products. I've got pretty much every one that you can think of installed because different ones do different things. And I actually just emailed one of our webinar attendees. He emailed me the other day, and he asked, Brian, I know that on the webinars you use Photomatics a lot of times, but On One just recently released some sort of promotion with HDR Express again with unified color. And which one, I'm getting mixed signals. And I responded very, very simply. I use a multitude of products. I'll use NYX HDR Effects Pro because sometimes the particular look that it gives with its tone mapping algorithm is favorable for that particular image. Don't get comfortable, but don't get so comfortable that you put your blinders on and you're not willing to try other things. So in this case here, what we can do is we can send this to HDR Express. So I'm going to send my brackets here, and I'm actually going to deselect some of these brackets. I'm going to deselect this one and that one because I don't need to send all of them. I've got good information throughout these images. And I might also deselect this one. So now we've gone from 10 to 2, 4, 6, 7, which is fine. You could don't get me wrong, I could send all 10 of these, and I'd get probably a very similar result. You're just kind of reducing some of the bloat. So I'm going to go here to File, Plugin Extras, and I'm going to let HDR Express. Normally I'll have this ready to go, but I'm just going to let HDR Express do its thing so I could show you some stuff. When you first send images to HDR Express, and this is from Lightroom, but this will work as a standalone and within Aperture as well. No worries, Willis, signing in late. Well, we got you covered. We just basically started. So what I have here are the brackets I selected from Lightroom. You've got this checkbox here called Align Source Images. This would be helpful if you didn't shoot with a tripod. So if you handheld your brackets, which I don't really recommend. It's sometimes unavoidable. But if it's on a tripod, you don't need to worry yourself with this. And then this has a global ghost reduction algorithm. So you got one of 3 different options. You have to have one of them on. And when I spoke with their marketing manager, the reason why is because it helps blend the exposures together, which makes sense. So by default, I use natural. If there is no moving element, I'll use natural. Sharp edges would be if you have in your brackets, you've got, say, a car or people moving. those have sharp edges or hard edges, so you would use this. And if you got a combination of both, meaning you know, fluid motion and hard motion, you would use this combination smooth. So I'm just going to hit merge. I'm going to let it do its thing. While it does this thing, I don't really see too many questions, if there are any. Oh, that was pretty quick. Never mind. All right. So you've got these presets down here. These are kind of tone mapping presets, and what they do is they just kind of adjust these sliders at once. And I'm just going to tell you straight off the bat, I don't typically use any presets of any kind. I save all that stuff for post-processing. Now my goal here is, one, I wanted to get nice even exposure in the window. So here, look at this. We've got a nice even exposure, the best of both worlds, which we can further refine. We've got good detail out here, which we can bring out even more, and we've got good detail in the highlights and shadows and the midtones. But my point here is I want to bring out this kind of like, it says please, and I love that. When I saw that, that was instantly my thing. I also was happy with how this door frame is framing this door frame is framing this door. So it's kind of a cool three-dimensional effect. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use these sliders here, and I'm going to be paying attention to my histogram, as well as notice that we've got this HDR tone mapped image rendered about 10 stops of information. So let's go here. Let's drop this down. This is the brightness. This highlight slider is a recovery slider. So the more you bring it to the left, the brighter your highlights will be. So we don't want that. We actually want it more towards the right. And I typically drop my brightness in correlation with that to compensate. This shadow is a shadow recovery. So if you want to bring out the shadows, make them brighter, you would bring this to the right. I don't want that. I want my shadows nice and rich, so I keep it off sometimes. Your black point tells you where you want to start your black point, so bringing it to the left will make the black parts of your image a little bit, I guess, muddier, and to the right they'll be a little bit more defined. This contrast is not the kind of contrast you would typically expect to see. This is more of a kind of a tonal contrast or a localized contrast where it'll actually add a little bit of texture to the mid-tone areas. Now you want to use this very sparingly. I'm not exactly, I don't like to add texture during the tone mapping process. And then there's saturation, which is your overall color saturation. And then your warmth and your tint for white balance. Now, if you had a gray card, you can take your dropper here and, you know, white balance it off of there. And that's actually a pretty good job because that's a pretty neutral whitish gray. And you could see how what it did was it cooled off the image and dropped the tint down. So this is pretty good, pretty accurate. I might bring my brightness up just a bit. Okay, now we can save this. So just call it HDR untitled-2/HDRX for HDR Express. That's actually a good thing to tell you is I typically, actually no, this is HDRE. When based on the tone mapping product I use, that last letter will tell me which product was used. So I use E for HDR Express. I'll use X for Photomatics. I will use HDRP for HDR Photoshop, HDR Pro in Photoshop, which I very, very rarely use. And then I'll use HDRH for HDR Effects Pro by Nick. So here we'll just hit save. I'm going to save it as a JPEG. And I'm working in JPEG here just for the benefit of speed for the webinar. So here, let's take this image here and then this image here. Let's just compare. Oops, I don't want to reject them. That would be foolish. Let's compare them. So look at the difference between the two. I think you will agree with me that, one, the overall exposure is very similar. Look at the doors, look at the walls, very similar. But look at the highlights. It's all exposed. This is the key to good HDR. Forget about stylizing when you're tone mapping. Forget about getting some sort of a look. That's what you're going to use Photo Tools for, or any of your products for, afterwards. What you want here is to fix your camera's deficiencies and the limitations. That's all you want to do with tone mapping. Forget about everything else. Get a nice, even exposure. Because here, now you can see, look, up here, you had no idea that there was this kind of like plastic thing over here. And you couldn't see the little cityscape in the background over there. This is important information. So that's what I'm trying to preach with regards to good HDR. There's also obviously the whole thing of saturated colors and halos, but that is more about how much strength or light smoothing you apply to your image. Now there's a good question here. How effective would HDR Express be if you only had one exposure for the mid-range? Glenn, so you're saying, Glenn, my assumption is one exposure for the mid-range, meaning you only have one shot. You want to do a one exposure HDR, is that correct? Just confirm that in the questions module for me. Correct. Okay, cool. Thank you, Glenn. All right, very good question. My answer is it depends. If this was your only image, this was the only image you got, this would not make a good HDR image because you have a total loss of information here. There's nothing in the world that can bring this information back. We can drop the exposure down and try to wrangle it in, but you can see how it's getting just a bit over here. Because your camera does, like a 5D Mark II typically carries about 2 stops in either direction of information. So I'm going back here, 4 stops already. And it's just, that's it. It doesn't have any more information. It doesn't even let me go. All the data is already pushed against the shadow area of the histogram. So it depends. If this image didn't have that great of a dynamic range to begin with, you might be able to get away with one exposure. It depends on the scene. And I can show you. We'll go after this image. Let's stylize this image, and then I'll show you an image that we can try a single exposure, even though we have multiple brackets. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go from Lightroom and go to File, Plugin Extras, and go to Photo Tools so we can stylize. And I'm going to let it create a copy. I'll save it as a TIFF file, and I'll use my ProPhoto RGB color space and 8-bit. Normally, there was a question, how do I normally save? Actually, one just came in by Lita, and who else asked? Steven asked, how would I normally save it? Normally, absolutely. I shoot in RAW all the time, 100%. No reason not to anymore. CF cards, SD cards are cheap enough that you can get away with buying an 8 gig, 16 gig card and shoot RAW. I keep the RAW files on the computer, and then when I tone map, I save it typically as a 16-bit TIFF file. TIFF files are typically very, very clean files, and I save it uncompressed with full layer support. And then it stays as a TIFF through the end of the process. When I put it on my blog, or for instance, when I work on a webinar, I'll export it as a JPEG. Bill, I can help you out with that question also in a second about not finding the image. Let's just finish this first. All right, so there are a few things we want to do here. The way Photo Tools works, if you're not familiar with it, is it's a collection of about 380 different effects, and we break the effects down into main categories on the left here. Typically for me, I use the stylized effects category the most. It has all of the most creative effects for kind of landscape and this kind of stuff. And the way I attack it is I'll typically apply, the first effect I'll apply will be the one that will adhere to the most amount of the scene. So right off the bat, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply an effect called Thermopylae. And I like what it's going to, I know already what it's going to do to this image. It just adds this really cool kind of a brownish cast. And I like it on the entire image. What I typically do though is I'll drop the effect down to 0, and then I'll bring it up and stop where I'm happy. So I don't need that much. The next effect that I'm going to try to apply is called Moulin Rouge, and I'm not actually sure how it's going to affect here, but let's see. It's a bit strong, but I am going to keep it because I like what it does to the shadow here. So there's a common kind of a, you'll see some photographers out there, complain about HDR, how it doesn't, most HDR is way surreal and unrealistic because you lose your shadows. And that is true. Um, one of the things with HDR is sometimes when it's overdone, you actually start brightening your shadows too much. And that's not right because shadows, there's a visual logic to a scene. If you have a light source here and you've got some sort of object in the way of, say, another surface, that will cast a shadow. Now, what we've got here is we've got a natural shadow line right here based on the curve of that window. So what I'm doing is I'm using some effects to bring out that shadow just a little bit more. Also, to kind of enrich this shadow over here, there's no meaningful information for me. So I like having that detail. Now David's asking, how do you add one effect over another? It's just a matter of double clicking, and it's a good question to ask, David. You can see over here is the stack. This is kind of like your effect stack. So we started with our original. Let's turn these effects off. Here's the original. I then added this effect called Thermopylae, and you can hide it or show it by clicking in this column, and you'll see this little eyeball staring at you. And then I added Moulin Rouge. So we have 3 effects, and all you do is you either double click on the effect, or you can hit this button that says Add to Stack, and that'll add that whatever selected effect to your stack. The next thing I want to do is add an effect, and I'm going to try to see what Blue Dawn Leonidas will do to this door only. So I'm adding it to the stack, and it adds to the whole image. You can see how it adds to this entire image. And what I'm doing is I'm adjusting the strength, but I'm only really paying attention to the doors. And I kind of like what it's doing to the doors, and I like what it's doing to this bottom part of the brick. So watch what I can do. This is, next to the HDR lessons that you're getting here, this is a very important lesson for stylization, especially in Photo Tools. Do not take things at face value. I say this on every webinar. You don't have to take things at face value. What I mean by that is, just because you apply Blue Dawn Leonidas doesn't mean you have to have it on the whole image. Watch what I'm going to do. I know that I want Blue Dawn Leonidas only to apply it to certain parts of this scene. What I can do is I can hit this button called Invert Mask, and it hides the effect. It's still there because you can see the eyeball. Now what I can do is I can take this brush at the bottom here, right down here, called a masking brush, and I can change my masking mode. Right now it's paint out, which means I would be able to remove Blue Dawn Leonidas. But I've already removed it from the whole scene by inverting the mask. What I can do is I can click my paint out to paint in. And now I can actually draw the effect exactly where I want it. And so I'm just going to draw it on this door. I'm going to draw it on the door in the background because I like what it did to the door in the background. And I'm going to draw it on the bottom part of this brick wall. Make sure you get all the parts so that you're consistent. So this adds a nice color contrast, which I dig. I dig this a lot. And then the last effect I'll apply is probably going to be Just Enough Darkness. Just Enough Darkness was literally built for this type of scene because what it does is it punches up the shadows. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop it down, and I'm going to, this time, instead of painting in, I'm going to just select Paint Out, and I'm going to remove that effect from the doors because it darkened the doors too much. The doors are kind of my focal point, and so I don't want them too dark. But I like how it's darkening everything else. So now we've got this very sinister look. Oh, Peter, awesome question. Am I like Wacom tablets for better support? So what Peter's referring to by a Wacom tablet is, I don't know how many of you have Wacom tablets, but it allows me to get much finer control. Yeah, Peter, I have 2 Wacom tablets. And actually, for those of you that are interested, and I'll go over this later, next Thursday, a week from today, we're doing a joint webinar with Wacom. So half of the webinar will be kind of like Tablets 101, and then half of it will be ways you can use a tablet with our products. So let me see. Gary's saying, what if I wanted to move Moulin Rouge ahead of Thermopylae? Let me see, and let me just see the rest of the question. How would I do that? Oh, that's easy. All you would do is this. You could, let's turn off these effects. So now we've got these 2. You can just drag it on top of it. Oops. And now it just rearranges the order. And you could turn these back on, and it'll retain the masks, which is cool. Oh, and this is a good point, actually. Um, you can see here that if I turn this off, oops, and we go to Blue Dawn Leonidas, and I go to Show Mask, this is actually, I'm glad I did this now. It's showing where I painted the effect in, and I missed a complete spot here and a spot there. This happens to me all the time because I'm one of the world's sloppiest drawers. So I'm going to select my brush. I'm going to select Paint In again because I want to paint it in, and I'm going to just fill those in. I won't even blame it on the fact that I'm left-handed, which I am, but maybe it has something to do with that. Okay, now let's do this. If we go to hit None on this tab bar, it hides that entire library column. And now if we go to View and then, oops, and Fit to Screen, now we have a nice big view. And if we toggle this checkbox of the preview, there's our original image. And then that's our after image with just a few double clicks. Jerry asks a great question. I'm going to answer your question, Jerry. Jerry's asking, do multiple filters combine into a single PS layer? And I'll answer that just by clicking Apply. What did you do to get the mask view, Jerry? There's a button. You remember the button, Jerry, that said Paint In, Paint Out? 2 buttons over to the right, it says View Mask. So you click that. Now, Jerry, I said I would answer your question with a single click, and I didn't answer your question with a single click because I wasn't in Photoshop. Yes, to answer Jerry's question, so I had what, 4 or 5 effects. If you are if you're accessing photo tools from Photoshop, and you hit Apply, all 5 effects will apply to one single layer. It'll say the layer will be called On One Photo Tools 2.6. But you won't have an individual layer for each effect. So here's the image. Let's take a walk. So let's just select this one, this one, and that one, and then let's click this. And so here's our normal mid-range exposure. Here is our HDR base image. Here is our stylized HDR image. Now you have a real nice exposure, and it's very compelling. But we're not done. Now we can go into the Develop module in Lightroom. And I want to bring out some texture in these doors. In Lightroom, if you go to the Develop module, right under your histogram is this little control bar. And the one to the right looks like I don't know, it looks like a weird magic wand, but it's really a brush with these dots around it. This is your adjustment brush. If you click it, you can control different settings of your brush. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring the brightness up, I'm going to boost the contrast, I'm going to boost the clarity, and I'm going to boost some of the sharpness. So basically, wherever I brush, I'm going to increase brightness, contrast, clarity, and sharpness at the same rate. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to brush it on this door, and I'm going to brush it on this door here. Now, just to show you how scalable this is, watch as I bring the brightness up even more. See how it's only brightening the door, or the doors rather? So it's real time, meaning you can paint where you want and then continue to adjust. Let's say you want more contrast, you can do that, or you want it to be to have more clarity but not that much sharpness because you're starting to get over sharpening. Well, there you go. And then finally, let's close that and let's drop down and let's add a little bit of a vignette. Actually, I'm going to add a pretty hard vignette. Let's maintain highlights. Nah, I don't want those highlights. That's cool. Is it creating a mask? Sort of. Sort of, Peter. Lightroom doesn't actually create mask. It kind of does, but you don't have access to the mask per se. You can do stuff to the image with your adjustment brush and with your cloning tool and your healing tool, but you don't have access to really do much more than that. If you don't have Lightroom, can you do that in Photoshop? Yeah, you can. You could. There are ways to do it in Photoshop. And there was a question here. Carl's asking, do I use monitor calibration software to make sure that what I see will get printed? That's a great question, Carl. It's very, very important. I'll take just a quick minute to talk about calibration. I don't use calibration software to calibrate my displays. I use calibration hardware. So it's a device. It's a USB device, and I use the Color Monkey Photo by X-Rite. And I cannot stress enough. I cannot stress enough the importance of calibrating your displays. If to put it this way, if you just bought your camera and your lens and you have, say, $500 and you were going to buy another lens and you don't have a calibrator, buy the calibrator first. Because you could, I wonder, let me see if this will work for you. If this will work on over webinar. Let's change our profiles. So I'm going to go here. This is a Mac, obviously, and I'm going to go and change my calibration profile to what you would normally see. So you can see I've got these various display profiles. Let's go to which one would Apple? Let's do Apple RGB. And while we're at it, let me open up an image because it's pretty single colored image. Let's open up. Before I do that, let's go to back to my original calibration display. Actually, so you should be able to see to some degree the difference. All I want to do is open up a quick image to illustrate how important this is. So let's go to HDR, Express, or Potpourri. Let's go to this next image that we're going to work on. Okay. So we're going to work on this image next. All right. This is my calibrated display. Let's go here. Do you see the color shift? This is a generic Apple RGB display. This is color LCD, which is what you'll typically use. And it doesn't even, I wish you guys could be here with me right now to see the real difference compared to what you're seeing on the compressed stream. And then this is the correct. The differences are profound. They're very profound. So it's really important that you calibrate your displays because you're working on a skewed playing field if you don't. Is it correct that is it true that not all displays can be calibrated? I've never heard of a display that couldn't be calibrated. So Martin, I would say I would never think that there was a display that it's based also on the operating system, but Windows and Mac support custom calibrated files. So essentially, what the Color Monkey is doing is it's creating this ICC profile for you. What happens is when you launch the software, like here's the Color Monkey software, you put your device against your screen. You literally hold it or you kind of hang it so that the device is, the photo sensor is facing the screen, and then the display flashes colors. And then it registers those colors, it analyzes them, and then it adjusts accordingly. Randall asks a great question. Can you calibrate, or do you calibrate your displays in total darkness? What a great question, since we're talking about this, and I hope this is okay that we're doing this, a slight digression from HDR. When you calibrate in the environment that you typically work in. So when you're, I know what you mean, Randall, in terms of do you calibrate in darkness because you don't want the external lights to bias, but when you're working, those lights, forget about what it's biasing on the screen. Focus on how it's biasing your eyes. So these lights are affecting your eyes right now. So what I do when I calibrate, I typically have my shades drawn when I'm working because I want to reduce the ambient light. But I definitely have my ceiling lights and my standing lamps on. So I turn them on and I calibrate because I want the calibration. I want my eyes to register with the light and the calibration. So definitely just do that. You don't have to turn the light. I love that. And Vicky, I'll link at the end to the device I recommend. Is Spider a good calibration device? Sure. It's Thomas, I have my loyalties. That's just how I am. And one of my best friends is a product manager at X-Rite, and so I'm very familiar with their products, and I've used their products for years. So I've just become very loyal to them, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. So I would recommend whatever. I would recommend something over nothing if that helps. But if you were to say what do you recommend in terms of brand, I would say Color Monkey or X-Rite because I'm familiar with their products. All right, let's move on. I see a bunch of other. There was a question actually. Do I ever touch the HSL with these images? And HSL stands for hue, saturation, and luminance, and it's right here on the develop module. Absolutely, it depends on the image, but I will definitely, when I'm done here, I will start adjusting. Let's say I want to bring out some of this color here. One of the cool things you can do, if you don't know this about Lightroom, you see these little circles here? They're not actually like random designs. This is a little bumper that if you click it and you put the cursor over a particular color, look over here, look at these color values right here. Watch as I move it around. You see how it's highlighting the appropriate color? So I can go to the color that I want and then increase the luminance or decrease it. In this case here, it's so dark that it's not making much of a difference. But I can go to this over here, make that brighter, and it works on whatever color range that crosshair is on. So it's pretty cool. When you're done, just park the bumper back by clicking on it, and it parks it. Yeah, Susan, I'll repeat the information. All the hardware I mentioned, I always show it at the end of the webinar, so you don't have to worry about that. All right, let's go to a little bit more of a prettier scene, not one that's caked in asbestos. So I took this image a couple weeks ago when I was in Seattle with my buddy Jacob. We went to this place called Tulip Town in Mount Vernon, Washington. And so let's go to one of the mid-ranges. This is a 15 millimeter fisheye lens, and you can see it's so wide that my little tripod leg is in the scene, which I don't worry about because it's pretty easy to get rid of this, and I'll show you how we can get rid of this in post. So let's take these images here. Let's actually walk through the brackets. So you can see that we want to get good detail in the sky because there were some pretty awesome clouds that day. And they were slow moving. You can see as I cycle through the brackets, the clouds are not really moving. So I wasn't worried about ghosting. And there was no wind because you can see there is no real movement in the flowers themselves, which was amazing. The only movement is this girl over here. You can see her right there. Oh. But she's so small in the frame that I really don't care. I could clone her out, but it doesn't really matter. Anyway, so now we go through the shadow brackets. We want to get detail through the flower stems. Let's go here and let's send it to HDR Express again because I like the result here for HDR Express over Photomatics. Merge in HDR Express. I'll let it do its thing. Let me see if there are any questions that came in. David's asking, I use Aperture and CS5. Can you do what I'm doing here with Aperture and CS5? Sort of. You can send your images from Aperture to Photoshop and then launch Photo Tools. Absolutely. But you need Photoshop, which you seem to have already. Jerry asks also a good question that I was waiting for it to come up. You remember we were in Photo Tools before with that Urbex image. So let me answer Jerry's question first. When you go into Photo Tools and you stack your 5, 6 effects and you hit apply, can you go back into Photo Tools and re-edit them? The answer is yes and no, and I'll show you what I mean by that with this image here. And Benny's asking that he has Photoshop. Can we do a run through with that? Sure. Perfect, perfect thing to do, Benny. So here's HDR Express. Let's go here. Let's start editing this a little bit. Let's bring back the highlight recovery a little bit. No, let's bring it up. Let's drop the brightness a tiny bit. Let's shadows, let's keep it down. Black point, let's boost up a bit. Contrast just a tiny bit. Saturation, I'm going to drop it a bit. It's a bit too saturated for me right here. I can boost the saturation later on. And then my warmth, I'm going to cool this off because it's a bit too warm for me. And actually, what I can try to do is just white balance off of this gray cloud, which is fine. Now we're going to hit save. And then I'm going to go to HDR-E for HDR Express. And we've got our image. Now, to be fair for Benny, let's send these images to Photomatics, which is a product that a lot of people have. I'm going to don't need ghosting. Reduce chromatic aberration is fine, and we'll call this HDR-X for HDR Express. And we'll try to get the best shot here as well, and we can compare the two. Okay. I'm going to drop my strength of Photomatics down to about 90%. I typically do that for nature or these kind of landscape scenes, and then straight to the light adjustment. My white point, where's my histogram? I always like viewing my histogram when I'm working. There it is. All right, so we don't have any blown highlights or clipped shadows. In fact, this is as nice of a curve as you can ask for, because you've got nice tonal information through the midtones, nothing that's clipped or blown out. So I don't even need this. Well, I'll keep it just in case. Oops. Go away, virtual windows. My gamma, which is the overall brightness, I'm going to drop it down just a bit. And my luminosity, I'll bring it up to bring out some of the shadow detail and also darken some of the shadow detail with the detail contrast. Now I'm going to hit save and re-import, and we can compare the two. Jeffrey is asking, why did the color shift so much when you went to Photomatics? Well, it's a great question. It's a difference between the algorithms. Now, let's select these two images. All right, so the image on the left, let me just make sure which one's which. Grid, Express, and Photomatics. So Express will be on the left. So this is HDR Express, this is Photomatics. Let's analyze some of the things. So let's zoom in. All right. So we've got, I prefer the details in the tulips with HDR Express. Overall, I also appreciate HDR Express's handling of shadows. Looks a little bit more realistic. I do like Photomatics' handling of texture a little bit better. And then in terms of the clouds, which is very important up here, it's a toss-up between the two. It's a bit too bright in the highlights. I kind of like a combination, but I wouldn't say one is terribly better than the other. One thing that Photomatics has that better than HDR Express in this example is there is slight chromatic aberration at the edges of these tulips, which are kind of wrangled back over here. Now, let me see if I could zoom in enough to show you what chromatic aberration is. Let's see if we can zoom in 3:1. That's better. Okay. Let me just wait for the screen to catch up. Do you guys and girls see the edge of this tulip? How there's that slight kind of like a bluish, I think maybe even a magenta. I'm not sure because I can't see red, but there's a cast over here. That's chromatic aberration. And that typically occurs in HDR when you have an extremely high amount of dynamic range. You'll see this a lot um, if you're shooting out of a window, like in that image prior, the Urbex image. If it's very, very bright, a lot of times on the edges, if we go back to this image, on the edges here of the window pane, you'll see that chromatic aberration. And it's because in this case, it's a trouble of kind of getting the dynamic range to appear between something that's very dark and very bright. So if we go back here, here's the HDR image. That's chromatic aberration, and Photomatics has an option to minimize that. It doesn't really matter to me that much because, one, when we zoom out, the combination of the stylization and how small it is probably not going to be very, very apparent. Um, but oh, is there a green edge on the other side of the flower? I wonder. I can't see green either that well on this side. Yeah, so this is just, these are byproducts. Um, are we likely to see the same in Photoshop? Dave's asking. It depends. I didn't try Photoshop, but that's something. That's why I said don't ever choose just one. You've got two perfectly viable options right here between these two. One might be better than the other for you in any given particular case. So it's best to kind of know the limitations of each product. In this case here, I do prefer the overall result of HDR Express, which is why I went with it. And what we can do now is let's send this to Photoshop, and we'll start stylizing. Kevin's saying that he's heard chromatic aberration referred to as halos. No, I don't think that I don't think that's the case. Halos will typically occur when the tone mapping software goes from detects a very, very bright area like sky, and then it detects a darker edge like the edge of a building, and it doesn't have enough. This is why I said it's important to get the right brackets, not any number of brackets. If you have enough brackets to cover the exposure detail from the brightest part to the darkest part, your tone mapping will be nice. But if you're missing detail from where a bright area, let's see if I have an image to kind of show you that. Let's just use this example again. If you don't have enough detail to cover this bright area here against the darker one, what will happen is that is where you will get this haloing, because this tone mapping software will try to smooth out that area. And in that process, it's going to create a halo. Now you can wrangle that back with the light smoothing slider. What if you merge the two images from the different HDR software? That's a great option, Michelle. You can certainly try that. Um, for me, it's kind of, I don't think it's necessary, but we can certainly do that. Like we can take both of these images here, we can send them, say, to perfect layers and just blend them together. Oh wait, I sent all of the images? I guess I did. We don't need to do that. Let me close out. Oh, I did. I see. Let me select where is it? Where'd my images go? Oh, it's over here. Express and Photomatics. Now let's send those to perfect layers. It's a good call. We can certainly try that. So we've got, this is HDR Express, and this is Photomatics. And what we can do is let's bring the HDR Express on top, and then just kind of use a masking brush to, with a, oops, select that, drop the opacity down, and then just kind of paint in a little bit of that detail. And then also from here, I'm not painting in the blue because I like the blue, but I will drop the brush size and just kind of paint along the edges here to kind of reduce some of that chroma. And so that's I mean, perfectly viable. maybe bring in some of that texture that I said I liked over here. Just kind of, there we go. Now we go file save, and that's going to update the PSD file. And now we have kind of a blended image. Is a color fringing a problem of ghosting? Um, Not really, not necessarily. I know what you mean, but if you looked at the brackets, there was no wind. Those tulips were still as still can be. So here's our merged image. Let's send this one to Photoshop. Let me close the first one. My dog is going crazy right now. I don't know why. All right, the first thing we're going to do is let's get rid of this tripod. And so in Photoshop, it's really easy with something like the content-aware fill, which is part of CS5. And with content-aware fill, I'm just going to use my lasso. I'm going to draw around the tripod. And then I'm going to hit Shift-Delete or Shift-Backspace, and it brings up the fill dialog. And the key here is under the contents, with the Use dropdown, have content-aware fill selected. Then we'll hit OK. And what this will do is it'll realistically kind of fill that in. Now we've got to clone this little weed over here, so what I can do is just use my clone stamp, source like this area here, and then just get rid of it. And then I can also just get rid of it over here. I can get rid of, this. That's the wonderful thing about something like dirt, which has so many patterns to it to begin with, like dirt, sand, concrete. It's very easy to kind of, as long as you've got the same kind of lighting pattern and texture, it's very easy to kind of get rid of certain things. So we got rid of the tripod fairly easily. If I wanted, I can probably, here's a kind of an interesting thing we could try. Under the healing brush, if we go to the patch tool, so all you do is you press and hold on a button, go to the patch tool, and then I'm going to draw around this little area here. And I don't know if this is going to work, but when you make your selection, drag it to somewhere else that you want to source from. And it actually did let's deselect. It did a pretty good job of getting rid of that entire thing. We can kind of blend it in if we wanted to, but that big distraction is gone. That's a cool little thing to do. And if you want, you can also just quickly, with a healing brush or with a clone stamp, let's just kind of source over here and just kind of get rid of these things. I'm a big fan of reducing distraction across the primary lane or avenue of a scene. All these things take your eye away, and it's something that I do pretty often, and I have no regret about it because I'm not a photojournalist. All right, now let's go into Photo Tools. So here in Photo Tools, we can do various things, but it's not really needed to do too much. I'll show you some effects that might actually help minimize some of the artifacts that you see here in the HDR image. First thing we're going to do is we're going to apply an effect called Pastel Colors. Pastel Colors is under the Stylized Effects category. This is a wonderful effect to use for any kind of nature scene because what it does is it boosts the certain colors. Now, when it comes in, it looks awful, which I think you'll agree. It's almost like neon. But we're going to drop it to 0 and just boost it up just a tiny bit. And you can see how it just creates this beautiful yellow line across the curved horizon. The next thing we're going to do is let's see what we can do with, trying to think for the dirt. Maybe creamsicle might be good. And I'm just caring about what it's going to do for the dirt here for now. It might work, it might not. Oh yeah, creamsicle is a big one. I like what it does to the overall image. It's going to take forever to process, but I can answer questions. So that's good. And then, what can we do? Maybe just enough darkness, just a little bit of just enough darkness. Drop that down and just boost it up a tiny bit. And then the last thing we'll do is It'll either be Sunglow or Orton Here's a Who. Let's try Orton Here's a Who. Okay, let's drop it down and get it to a place we're happy. And then let's turn it off and let's add Sunglow and we can compare the two. So Sunglow, actually we might be able to do both in tandem. Sunglow is okay. Let's turn it off and let's turn Orton Here's a Who back on. And then turn Sunglow on. Yeah, that's good. So let's hide it. And then here's our original, kind of muted. And then here's what we were able to do with photo tools to kind of really give it a nice, very, very ultra realistic look. Like you should see it here. It looks pretty good on the broadcast, but it looks awesome in person. Am I clicking to add stack every time, Andrew? Depends. Sometimes I'll double click on an effect. Sometimes I'll go to add to stack so that you can visually see what I'm doing. They both do the same thing. Can I describe what Creamsicle did? Well, if you go to the effect, a few things. One, it shows you who the creator is and a description, but you also have this before and this after of a stock preview image. And then what you can also do is just go down to the effect and just toggle it on and off to see what it does. Now I'm going to hit apply, but it might take a little bit to process because that creamsicle effect is very, oh, wow, scratch that. It's done. Here's earlier what I wanted to show you. We had multiple effects, but you see how it comes across in its own layer, which you can turn on and off. We can save to update that PSD file. We've got the image in Lightroom now. Now we can do some final edits, like the first thing I want to do is rotate because it's slightly off-centered. Make it, that's good. And then let's start just playing around with some stuff like boost the contrast a bit, boost the fill light a tiny bit. I'm going to desaturate the yellows a tiny bit, but I'm going to boost its luminance so it kind of glows a little bit more. And then finally I'm going to add a slight vignette because it kind of has a circular shape to it already. And there you go. That's Would I use my HDR brush on this, Benny? Sure. So I have a brush here that I created called, it's just an HDR texture brush. And I could use it like on the top of the tulips to give them a little bit more texture, make them stand out a bit. You see how they're getting a little bit brighter? You could do that. And maybe down here. If you want to kind of add to the kind of like almost illustrated look. What does the brush do, Carl? It's just a combination of these sliders, like I showed earlier. It's a little bit of brightness, a little bit of contrast, a little bit of clarity, and a little bit of sharpness. Salita's saying, Photo Tools applies to one layer. Is there a way to apply to the stack? That actually is a good question. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open this back up into Photoshop for a second. Or let me think. Do we have that original image? Well, let's open this up. Edit in Photoshop, but let's edit the original so we have the layers. All right, so let's say, for instance, let's say two things. One of two possibilities. Let's say either you you love the effects here and you don't remember what order it was or anything like that, or let's say you have 3 or 4 different HDR shots from this scene, like maybe you have another one that is just of the yellow tulips, but you want to apply the same look because you want to do a series. But you already hit apply. Once you hit apply, you can't go back and you can't open up Photo Tools and get those layers there. What you could do is, let's pretend we don't have that layer. Let's turn it off and let's go here to the background. If we go back to Photo Tools and we go to the categories, or rather to the presets tab over here, Under the recently used, what Photo Tools will do is it'll remember the last 6 things you did. So you can see here and it shows you preview. See here, the last image, the second to last image we worked on was that grunge image. So if I go to this last use, you can see the preview, you can see the before and the after, and if I hit add to stack, what it's going to do is it's going to bring all of those effects back at the strength that they were in. So here's the creamsicle effect coming back in. And I'll show you once it's done, you'll have that entire stack recalled. So there they are. The image looks exactly the way it did before. Now what you can do is you can go into the file and then save the preset and say this is a tulip field. And put it in a category. Type your name and then create it. And now you can go back and you can see there's tulip field. Now you have a preset that you can apply. You're welcome, Richard. All right. Already exceeded our time in just 2 images. My goodness. Well, I think there were some good tips here. What I want to do to finish things up, I have more images, but we have another HDR webinar later this month, so I'll save those images there. What I'll do instead is let's do the hardware stuff. How does Photoshop's own merge and ghost correction compare with HDR Express or HDR Expose? Gordon, so Photoshop and Photomatix are the only two that I believe that allow for users to select the area that you want to reduce ghost again. All the other ones do a global ghost reduction. All of them are pretty proficient. It depends on what's moving. So I hope that makes sense. Personally, thanks, Marcus. Personally, I think Photomatix has the best localized ghost reduction. And just overall, guys, I'm just not a fan of Photoshop's HDR Pro. I'm just not a fan of it. I've used it. I don't care for it. When and why do you choose one over the other when you have 3? I assume you're talking about the 3 different or multiple tone mapping products, Carl. That's a great question. It's a hard one to answer. You just kind of get a sense of which product, the results of which product will work best for the particular image. Like, in fact, actually, for this image here, normally if I took the shot here, let's pretend that I cropped this down significantly for whatever reason. Let's say in camera I shot this. Let me bring it up a little bit. And there was no window. I probably would have used Photomatix because I like the way Photomatix handles localized texture better. But I like the way HDR Express handles highlight recovery. So, because I kept the window in there because I like the way it frames the shot, I decided with HDR Express. Do I have any comments on the advantages of HDR Expose over HDR Express? Gordon, HDR Expose, so Unified Color is a company that has 3 products. 2 of them, one of them is called HDR Express, which we use, and the other one is called HDR Expose. HDR Expose is one of the most technically advanced products I've ever seen. It's just too much overhead for me. The veiling glare option, which without going into too much detail, is very nice, but the product is so slow, in my opinion, it's just not worth it for me. What about HDR Effects Pro by Nick? David's asking. Great product. I like it because you have those U points, so you can kind of control the look of individual images. The only thing I don't like about it is that it's only in the confine of a circle. I prefer to draw with a pen. but it has the most amount of HDR algorithms out of any product I've seen. And Andrew's saying, I guess we're gonna have to buy both. The best thing for you guys to do as well is download the trials. Every company has like a 30-day trial, fully functional trial. Try it. Yeah, Martin's saying that Expose and Photomax have similar features, but that he does batch a lot, which I don't, and you know, you said I never do batch. I never batch process HDR images. Never, ever, ever. Because I like to, each image is a unique thing for me, so it takes more time. I never batch anything, no matter what it is. I've never been a fan of batching. Um, but then again, I've never really had to uh, burn through, thousands of images at once. So I'm not gonna go ahead and say there's no merit to it. For me, it's not necessary. I saw a question about a tripod. If you, it was Charles, if you had to shoot multiple images without a tripod, which HDR Pro? Oh, great question. So Charles' question is, if I didn't have a tripod and I had to shoot handheld, which one would be the best in auto aligning? Great question. Um, Photomatix does a really nice job. HDR Express, it depends on how bad the alignment is. I'd say Photomatix is one of the best out there for that. And Photoshop does do an excellent auto align. All right, people want to know what let's talk about gear. People want to know about the gear. Let's do the gear, Susan. The first product is called a Promote Control. So if we go to promotesystems.com, let me put it in the chat module as well so you can actually click on the URL. Now, let me just go to the device itself. In the chat module, I just put the link so you can click on it. This is the device I use. It's called a Promote Control. It's expensive. It's like 300, on the website it's 330, but if we go say to BH Photo Video, so B&H, and we do a search for Promote Control, it's $298, so it's $30 cheaper, but it's not in stock, temporarily out of stock. All right, well, let's go to Adorama. And let's search for Promote Control. Out of stock. So I don't know if they have it, but if you want it right now, I think you might have to order it from these guys. But this is what I use. Thanks, Linda. Um, Lori's saying on batch processing, guess I've never done HDR panoramas. Oh no, quite the contrary. I've done plenty of HDR panoramas. And I know what you mean because your panoramas, you want each panel to be processed the same. I still send them in manually. Like in the last webinar, which one did I do? Oh, the Italy one. Like, here's a panorama. If I change the skip, if I change my Lightroom catalog to the catalog for that webinar, and we go to here, this is an HDR panoramic. I'll show you the three. Here are the three panels: left, middle, right, and here's the finalized version. This uses photo tools and focal point in one to kind of create this final look. This is just the tone mapped image. This is the tone mapped HDR panel. So Andrew, this is what Linda was saying was an HDR panoramic is you take brackets. Now I use a tilt shift lens, so that's why everything is perfectly straight. But it's basically panning from left to right. You create three different HDR images, and then you use software to blend them. What were the other things we were talking about? What do I use to stitch the panel? It's a kind of a pricey product, but it's called Autopano Giga. I'll put the URL. It's, I think, a French company. It's the best out there that I've seen. You can do it in Photoshop as well if you have Photoshop, but I personally like this. How much is it? This pricey, if I remember correctly. Oh, it's in French. I need to change this to English. Oh, it's in euro. So 259, what, just double it? So about, oh, I don't need all that stuff. I just need AutoPan Giga. There it is. So it's about, why can't I have in US dollar? What's the conversion of this? Oh, Color Monkey. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. All right, so if we go to Amazon and you do X right Color Monkey photo, this is the product. And so you remember how I was saying you basically kind of attach it to your screen. Or you don't attach it, you just hang it, and then it starts flashing colors, and it creates your display, your profile. And this is actually a really nice display. The ISOs are awesome. So it's 450 bucks, worth every single penny. They have cheaper ones, but you get what you pay for. The other thing that I can recommend that I use all the time is, and actually next month in June I'm doing a webinar with X-Rite on how I use this color checker passport to get correct color, correct white balance and color profiles in the field. So here's the link to that. This is $100. Nothing's cheap about photography. 199 euros, $284. Martin, thank you so much. Um, so about $300 just to round it up to the nearest 100 US. Um, Michelle, thank you too. Thanks, Google. All right. So those are the things. Benny. So last question about panos. You would bracket for each side, then tone map, then stitched and stylized. Yes. What I would do is, I don't have the individual brackets here. I took 9 brackets here, 9 brackets here, 9 brackets here. Tone mapped tone map this one, or actually no, I usually tone map the center first. I get it to a place that I like it, and then I send these, and I don't touch the sliders. I just hit apply, so it tone maps, so that all the panels have the exact same thing. Now, to Linda's point and to Martin's point, this is where batch would be helpful because you're not changing any settings. So in a way, perfectly viable. I personally like to see the images. I like to do things individually, and so that's kind of where that comes from. Then when these three images are tone mapped, I use that AutoPan Giga to get me that. So those are the 3 images stitched, and then I use the stylization products to get that. Feed the poor dog. They're fed. They're fed, Pat. Yeah, both John and Lori both brought up at the same time the Seth Resnick webinar we did yesterday was great in terms of how he showed how you can use you can create import presets with your color calibration profile at different ISOs. I'm not going to bother going into that right now because the webinar is much better. It goes live today. Actually, the podcast one might be live already. For those of you that may not be familiar how to get to our podcast, I'll just show you right now. Here's iTunes. Go to the iTunes store. Search for On One. And there's On One University. You can do either one, but I go to the university. There's our podcast. And creating, yep, there it is, Seth Resnick's podcast. So that's up there already. And then I'll put it on YouTube and the university archive today. But you'll want to watch it. Have I ever used Apple's calibration, Marcus? No. No, 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 no. I use my Color Monkey. That's it. I don't trust software. Also, I'm colorblind. I'm red-green colorblind. I cannot trust myself doing things. I let the hardware do it for me. Um, Oh, good question, Michelle. Michelle's wondering, so when we were talking about this, when you what she was asking was when I do one image and I get the settings, and I go back, will the settings be the same? Yeah, I used Photomatics, and Photomatics, if you go into it and you go to the preferences of Photomatics, um, start tone mapping with, you see the first one says settings of previous session or default settings. Make sure you're at settings of previous session. What about the Huey? Gerald's is saying. So Huey Pro, that's the low end of X-Rate's calibration. It's okay, but I've had some defects with it when I first started using it, so I wasn't happy. How can you calibrate your monitor without any extra hardware? Depends. On the Mac, there's a product called, you can use the built-in Apple calibrator. It's a software. I don't, that's something that Marcus just asked. I don't use software, so I couldn't tell you effectively. And Martin's saying that the different one of the primary differences, there are two products by AutoPanel. There's Giga and Pro. Pro doesn't have, it's cheaper, it's 140 US, but it doesn't have the gigapixel capabilities. I actually do some very large scale panoramics, which is why I like that. I have a one of those gigapans, the these gigapano head. Oh, gigapan, that's what it is. I've got one of these guys. These are awesome. They're expensive, but they're awesome. This. And what you do is you put your camera on it, and it essentially it's a robot, and it swivels and turns the camera, so you can get these massive panoramics. What about the i1 Pro? Awesome. The i1 Display Pro is excellent by X-Rite. I used to use that until I got the Monkey. I like the Monkey the most. And yeah, Randall, i1 Display 2, that's the one. i1 Display 2 is what I use. If we go to Amazon, I'll put that in here as well. Great product. X-Rite i1 Display 2. There it is. Yeah, this is a bad boy. This one right here. Excellent product. And it's cheap. It's 200 bucks, so it's less expensive. Carl's asking no to Spider. Um, I'm not going to say no. I've never used it, so I can't speak to it. But I'm just an X-Rite guy. I have a sugar mama that buys me all these things. No, no, I work very hard, and photography is my living. So my wife, thankfully, is very sympathetic to that. That Gigapan thing was actually provided to us by the company who makes it. So I wouldn't have bought it otherwise, just because it's too expensive for the niche. Um, are there any other questions that I missed? How can I repeat how to find this on the podcast? Sure. In iTunes, again, go to the iTunes store. You'll see that link on the left. Search for On One, and two options will come up. Pick the second one, and then you'll see under podcasts our podcast. Just click on the title, and you can subscribe for free, and that'll basically download the latest podcast every day. Manfrotto makes a panel head. I personally use the iTunes podcast. The iTunes podcast will be available tomorrow. It'll be on YouTube today, though. This one today. The tripod system I use is made by Really Right Stuff, and I have the TVC23 with the BH40 ball head. This is the exact system I have. These are the legs and the head that I have. It is a beautiful thing. It's not cheap, but it's worth every single penny. Oh, I still need to know how to get the images back from Lightroom from HDR Express. It should automatically appear, Bill. So let's take a series of images really quickly. Let me go back to my catalog. So if you send these, let me hide this for a second. Okay, if we send these in, none of these are HDRs. Okay, and we go to File, Plugin Extras, HDR. One thing you could try to do, merge and edit an HDR Extra. So this automatically sends it, and so it doesn't have to do anything else. You just have to go to File and then Save. But what you can try to do is if you right-click on the root folder and go to Synchronize Folder, that will detect any new files. So try that. You're welcome, Randall. Yes, it was a digressed webinar, but it wasn't too bad. I hope it came up with some good info. You're welcome, Sarah. Yeah, it's Andrew. It's an expensive tripod system, um, but yeah. So Lita's saying that she has a spider and her monitor doesn't match the Epson 7900 prints exactly. You can always download your printer's profile as well. That's one of the nice things about the Color Monkey. If we go back to it, uh, where's my Color Monkey? Did I close it? Let me go back. There, the Color Monkey, not only does it calibrate your display, it'll also calibrate your printer and your projector if you have a projector. But it's that's the cool thing about it. What will happen is you launch the software and it will print a color check pattern on a piece of paper from your printer, and then you slide the Color Monkey across the page like a scanner, and it'll calibrate for your printer. So it's pretty cool. That's another good. Lori brings up an awesome question. Nice job, Lori. This is for Bill. If you if the brackets that you sent to HDR Express were sent from a collection, you won't see those update in the collection. You have to go to the folder of the images. Very good point in Lightroom. So here's Lightroom. Let's say I have the brackets in let's create a collection and we'll call this Urbex. And I take these images here and I send them to my Urbex collection. There's my dog, or one of them at least. If you were to send these to HDR Express from the collection and then hit save, you would not see them here. Because for some ungodly reason, it won't update collections on the fly. So you have to go to the folder and it should be there. My dogs are getting impatient. Let's see what else. What are the questions? Jeffrey's saying to set Photoshop's proofing profile to your printer profile after calibration. That's correct, absolutely too. To expect to see what you're getting on your print. Oh, Thomas asked the question that I said there is no magic answer to. How many exposures do you recommend for HDR? I can't recommend. I recommend getting the right number of exposures. So I don't know, Thomas, if you saw when we first did this earlier, I only sent 7 out of the 10 exposures to tone map because I didn't need all of them. Get more than less if you can. Make sure you get all the good details and then decide what you need later. But there is no magic number. Anyone who says that 3, 5, or 7 is the magic, they're misleading you. If there's a lot of movement, would you choose less? Depends. I'll still get the I'll audit what the movement is. Is it a ton of movement across everything? I don't know. I might try to get a single exposure HDR there. But if it's like nominal movement, I'll just get the same 9 exposures and see how the ghost reduction works. Can you do a basic calibration of your monitor with just your computer? Yeah, Andrew, you can download software to calibrate, but it's not as effective. At least not in my opinion. The hardware calibrator, the screen is flashing colors that this hardware calibrator is actually registering and calibrating accordingly based on your monitor. So I have three different displays. I've got two 30-inch displays and a 24-inch display, and each one of them is totally different. But what the calibrator is ensuring is that they all display uniformly. Don't worry, Michelle, we're going to end this soon. I don't want to keep this too long. Can a color monkey calibrate your TV? Um, the way that I've seen people do it is a lot of people will use a computer or a laptop as a media center and connect it to their TV via HDMI or DVI. In that case, yes. If it's a LCD display, you can calibrate it because like on a laptop, it'll register the TV as a display.